So thanks so much everyone for being here. We are thrilled to have such a nice group to talk about this fantastic book that we're gonna have a look at together throughout the course of the semester, but teach students how to learn. And this kind of workshop as part of faculty days will serve just as a bit of an introduction to it, to the concepts behind it, and hopefully we'll all continue to go on this journey together. And throughout today's workshop, please feel free to jump in, whether in the chat or just by unmuting and sharing your thoughts, whether you want to ask a question or share a reflection, or maybe even a practical comment of something that has applied to your work in the classroom, or whatever else that you do here at Wentworth. So with that, I'd love to introduce my wonderful colleague, Megan Hamilton Giebert, who's going to be facilitating the session along with me.
Hi, everybody. Thanks, Josh, for that introduction. For those who haven't met me, my name is Megan Hamilton Giebert, and I'm actually the newest instructional designer in the Teaching and Learning Collaborative. And Josh and I are very excited to have y'all here today. And as he hinted at, this is actually the start of a journey with a book that we have discovered and we'd like to explore further as the semester unfolds. But we think at the outset of the semester, we've got the opportunity to share with you some ideas that you could bring into your classroom this semester about how to teach students how to learn, emphasizing metacognition, growth mindset, and Bloom's taxonomy as tools in your toolbox that you can teach your students about to help them become better learners. So what we will cover today, we do have an hour. And a lot of content to get through. And while we're doing that, we're hoping to hear from you some. This is an interactive presentation, so there will be opportunities to contribute. We're going to practice a metacognitive activity where we compare and contrast studying and learning and define the differences between the two. Other definitions that you may have heard of prior to today, but will definitely help your understanding of metacognition, will be metacognition, growth mindset, and Bloom's taxonomy. And so we'll talk about ways to apply different concepts using strategies to foster student success, explore techniques and activities that you could actually implement into your classroom, or if you're not teaching this semester but interacting with students, you can bring them into your interactions with students. And then again, looking ahead, we'll outline additional opportunities that we have to deepen this course of study.
Fantastic. So let's start out by meeting our author, Dr. Saundra McGuire. She is an incredible wealth of knowledge and wisdom. She was a professor of chemistry at Cornell for many years, then moved to Louisiana State University, where after teaching chemistry for decades, she actually moved into an educational development role, kind of like Megan and I do here at Wentworth, where we work with faculty to kind of make teaching and learning even more effective across campus. So in that role, she had occasion to really think about how to apply some of the strategies that she had learned over the course of her years as a professor to a variety of disciplines and classrooms, and came up with this book. And this video from the AQ, the Association of Colleges, and I think it's the Association of Colleges and Universities, but maybe somebody can correct me on that, is a great introduction to just the concepts that she's going to start covering in this book, as it reflects, reflects on her work as a professor in the field. So let's have a listen.
Teachers tend to think that if a student has not done well on the first two exams, then they probably are not very capable in that subject. I used to think the same thing. If I had a student who flunked the first two tests in organic chemistry and they came in to see me, I would want to know, what's your backup plan? I know you thought you were going to be a neurosurgeon, but if you can't pass these first two tests in organic, you obviously are not going to get to medical school. I now no longer believe that, because I now understand what to teach students, how to teach them to focus on the concepts, how to determine whether they understand what they think they understand or whether they don't. And because I've personally seen students go from the 28s, 30s to 80s and 90s in a couple of weeks, now I understand that it's very important to have a faculty member who can instill confidence in the student that they can excel, and they know that the faculty member cares about their success and their ability to really thrive in the course. And I find that when faculty learn about this, they're very willing to try it. And I now get correspondences from faculty all over the country saying, I tried this, and I find that students who were failing are now doing very well.
So in that introduction, Saundra McGuire hints at a couple of concepts that may or may not be familiar to you. And if you would like to use your Zoom reactions, and you can give me a thumbs up or a applause if you've heard of any of these terms. The first one is growth mindset. Has anyone ever heard of growth mindset? Okay, some familiarity. Great. What about the term metacognition? I'm guessing you may have, because it's heavily influencing the name of our session and topic today. And what about Bloom's taxonomy? Has anyone heard of Bloom's taxonomy? Okay, some familiarity, especially among our instructors, our faculty, it looks like. Great, so we are going to be able to explain what we mean by that in these next slides. I think this is just helpful grounding to make sure we're all familiar with the terminology that we're using as we get into metacognition before we bring it to our students. So growth mindset is a term popularized by Carol Dweck. She wrote a very influential book in 2006, and fun fact, I actually read it last semester, so I'm still kind of geeking out about it. But she introduced these concepts of growth mindset as opposed to a fixed mindset. And many people, when they're trying to learn a new concept, fall into a fixed mindset mentality of, you know what, I'm just not smart enough to get this. I may never be able, this is outside my ability. I'm not a math person. I'm not a good writer. So I don't want to challenge myself because I know I'm already limited in my ability. There's no way I can influence it. What Carol Dweck's research has shown is that's actually not the case, and that learning, the potential for learning is always so much more than any one intelligence indicator or test or score might suggest. And the idea is, rather than seeing that test score or that indicator as, a ceiling, really that's just the floor of how far can you grow from that. And in order to move from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, that can be a painful process. Some students, especially coming up from a heavily standardized test schooling, may not have been introduced to this concept before. So the idea recognizing that intelligence is not fixed, intelligence is not limited, intelligence can be developed, and skills take practice and effort, not just natural ability, in order to perfect.
Yeah, and some of the research on growth mindset, we should go back to the past one just for a sec, on growth mindset indicates that it's actually a really almost determinative thing. And in going back to Saundra McGuire's kind of early professorship, where she was interpreting this stimulus of the student got a D on the first exam, and if both student and professor say, listen, you got a D, the student's like, well, I guess maybe I'm not a chemistry person, and the professor's like, hey, what's your backup plan? Well, that's kind of a fixed mindset, and they're probably not going to advance much beyond that. But if the professor and student both take a growth mindset approach, and often it's the professor who has to initiate that because the student is probably going to be feeling pretty down about themselves, and say, hey, actually, I don't believe that this D is determinative of in any way about your ability in the future in this discipline, in this subject. I think it's just where you are right now, and I can suggest some tools for you to improve. If the professor comes at it with growth mindset and offers that new way of looking at this data, which is that you got a D, that it's actually just not yet rather than never, then the student kind of opens up the possibility for them to consider new ways of doing and seeing and being. Before we move on to metacognition, does anyone in our fantastic Zoom room have any additional thoughts about growth mindset, or anything to add?
One thing I would say is I leave feedback for my students, for example, on their lab reports, but I need to figure out how to get them to read it because you'd see them making the same mistakes over and over as they submit one lab and the next lab. So I know that they're not reading it. And I would tell them, the feedback is there, read it. But do you have any suggestions on, how do we actually get them to look at the feedback so at least they're moving forward?
That's such a great question. I think it's such a common issue. As faculty, we spend so much time assessing, and then it's like, come on, look at the thing. So one way to have that happen kind of is to implement a system whereby they actually have to do something with the feedback and produce a second draft, or make those corrections and submit them, so that there's some kind of accountability that they actually have to take what you said and do something with it and show it to you, so that that they looked at it and actually took your feedback and improved based on it. So that's just a structural thing you could integrate into the assignments that you're doing, whether it's a lab report, a paper, or problem sets, whatever they are, to allow students to have that second go at it. And if you want to, you could even have it, be assessed at a different way. Maybe the first draft or whatever it is assessed at a certain level percentage, and then maybe they do some sort of even possibly peer evaluation where they get to get feedback from each other. That's assessed at a next level, and then after you do it. So there's a lot of ways to build in that structure, but I think just the starting point of realizing like something's not quite working about this system, the way I have it set up, is just a great starting point to be like, how else could I structure it? And we're always here to have those conversations with everyone. So thank you so much for that question, Marisha. Before we move on, does anyone else have any thoughts about growth mindset? Cool. Let's move on to metacognition. I love this image, by the way. It's like it's kind of like having a brain outside of our brain, like the observing self, the metacognitive, the outside of thought, around outside, that's able to see and perceive in ways that sometimes when we're stuck in our little kind of world, we aren't able to see and perceive. So metacognition is about understanding how it is that learning works. And oftentimes our students don't understand the processes by which they are acquiring new knowledge and skills. They've just kind of gone through school and done what's been asked of them, and often they've done well enough to get into college, but they don't really understand, what they're doing that's really effective at helping them build and construct new understanding, and what's not that effective. And sometimes it can be counterintuitive, because sometimes the thing that they experience as kind of struggling and it's difficult and whatever, that's actually the thing that's helping them build new knowledge and new neural pathways. And the thing that's actually just kind of going back over the textbook and they got it already, that's actually not that effective. So this metacognition, or understanding the processes by which learning happens most effectively, is really key. And we can empower our students with that knowledge. It also comes down to accurately judging one's level of learning, being like, where am I? Do I actually know this? Because the brain's really good at convincing ourselves that we're good to go. And when we take the test, we get the C, and we're like, wait, I thought I totally got it. So kind of about that accuracy. So yeah, let's move on to the next bullet point. And then, as I mentioned, it's really being consciously aware of the processes that you go through to solve problems. Because oftentimes when we're presented with a novel problem, we're not sure how to approach it or how to apply the lessons we learned the last time we did it to this next situation. So metacognition allows us to be really aware of what it is that we're doing and how to take lessons from the past and implement them in the future. Let's go to our next little bullet point. So it's, as a metaphor, it's kind of, or analogy, teaching students how to drive their own brains, in a sense, empowers them to think critically and learn more deeply. So just love to open it up to you all. What thoughts do you have about metacognition and about, teaching students these skills of thinking about thinking and understanding the processes by which they are engaging in learning?
So I work in accessibility services, and I'm not an instructor currently of any classes. And I think sometimes that puts me in a advantageous position, because we do, like, my one-on-ones with students, it wouldn't feel like a big stretch to talk about how a student learns, right? Like how they're taking in information. So as opposed to one specific subject and how they're doing in that one subject, to say, okay, well, what works for you? Do you listen to your textbooks, or do you read them? You know, things like that. And so I feel like that gives me a leg up in some ways to have these kinds of conversations, because it doesn't feel, you know, that like that much of a stretch. Or even, you know, if a student has extended time for exams, they'll tell me, you know, what they're doing with that extended time, why they need it. They can be, I've found my students to be like very like articulate and expressive about what they're using that time to do, which is like a real gift that I think we don't, it may not be something that's like that easy of a conversation to have without that structure. So I find I get to do that quite a bit.
So I used to give a post-test reflection. So with the exam, I give them this sheet of paper that says, how long did you study for this test? How did you study? Why do you think you didn't do well? You know, 20%, like my mistakes are due to 20% algebra, 30% new stuff, or whatever it is. So they analyze how they did. And then I ask them, how do you plan to study differently for the next class? So then I see two things that are problematic from my perspective, which is that one, even though they say, oh, I just didn't study enough, I'm going to study longer, or, you know, I didn't do this, I want to do this. They may have a plan, but implementing the plan is really difficult for them. So that changing study habits is still a problem that I'm still figuring out how to get them to change that behavior. The second issue is that they might say, oh, I did this and this, but now for the next class, I'm going to watch a YouTube video. For the next class, I'm going to go to office hours. But they may not necessarily realize that watching YouTube video is not going to help them unless they actually do it. So this misunderstanding of what they think or how they think they learn and what we think they learn, I think is very different. A lot of our math students think, oh, I'm going to just watch people do these problems. And 100% they're not going to learn that way. They learn by doing. So that, again, misunderstanding.
Another one I find on the math side is taking that study and making it happen sort of out of the context. And it's another one that doesn't really show up for them as a realization until after the first exam. But I find myself most commonly talking to people after that first exam and saying, you know, you probably did practice going into an assignment that you knew was about this particular method and working that way. And then when you get to the test, it's a mixture of things. And you have to think about, getting rid of the fluency of, I just did 5 problems of this type. And instead being able to tackle them out of that mental context. But I'd like to work a little bit more on talking about these kinds of things before that first test happens.
For sure. So thank you all. Thank you, Aria, Mami, and Lauren, for your thoughts, and also really cute cat. We had to see, definitely. And Saundra McGuire has the same thing. You know, she realized that when she kind of at the beginning of the semester was telling everybody, here's, I'm going to teach you how to learn. Half the people didn't really pay that much attention. But after they got a D on that first test, or a C or whatever it was, then they're like, oh, wait, okay, now I'm ready to listen, because I clearly do need to do something different. And as Mami said, often that comes down to, being an active learner rather than kind of trying to be a passive studier. And we'll talk more about that going forward. But let's move on to our next concept, which really, helps us to break down some of the ways that humans learn, and that when students are explicitly taught about this, about how students learn via this framework, Saundra McGuire says that that can be a really effective way to get them to understand, what am I doing and what could I be doing at another level to function higher, be, be at that college level, that critical level. So Bloom's taxonomy, just for a quick intro, was developed by Benjamin Bloom in the 1950s, educational psychologist, and it's been revised and updated various times. And the idea is just to break down kind of learning into different categories of, from what they used to call more lower order thinking, kind of the tasks that we're able to, that a computer now could do, remembering, recalling facts, defining things, and then kind of moving up into higher order thinking, things that you have to have more complex thought patterns, and you have to really understand the material deeply to be able to do effectively, like taking something, a concept, and applying it in a different context, or really drawing some new connections between things, or evaluating, justifying, comparing, contrasting, even creating something new. So this model of Bloom's taxonomy, this pyramid, you can find a million of them online, different ways to represent them. And we're going to watch a clip of Saundra McGuire in a sec, talking about her definitions of how she uses it, and maybe would introduce it to students using examples from her discipline, which is chemistry. And you'll notice that in the pyramid, there's different words that are used. So don't feel like it's a monolithic thing. You can take Bloom's taxonomy and kind of apply it to your context and find the verbs and words that really work for you, and really figure out where in your course these different tasks are going to be happening, and when you have to you could tell the students, hey, for this assignment or this assessment, I'm going to be really asking you to function at this level of Bloom's, and really be doing some of those remembering tasks, those kind of lower order tasks. So memorization would be a great way to study. But for this next project or assignment, whatever it is, you're actually going to be needing to do, evaluation analysis. So you're going to need to practice doing that task in order to get ready for this bigger assessment. You're going to need to design your kind of projects and assessments to build up to those. So let's hear what Saundra McGuire has to say.
One moment, I have to navigate out of the presentation for this.
Got to get to our spot too.
Bloom's taxonomy is just a hierarchy of learning levels, where the very bottom level is just straight memorization, knowledge. You could give me any formula or any definition that I ask you for if you're at knowledge, if you're at memorization. But if I asked you to explain in detail why it is we do what we do to calculate empirical formula, if you're only at knowledge, then you wouldn't be able to explain that in your own words. If you're at understanding, you could take anything, explain it in your own words, and you could paraphrase it. You could explain it to your 80-year-old grandmother or your 8-year-old nephew in words they understand. You could give them analogies and examples from their life about limiting reactants or stoichiometry if you're at understanding or comprehension. Now, if you're at application, you can use the information to answer questions, solve problems you've never seen before. If you're at analysis, which is another step higher, you could take any concept, break it down into simpler concepts. And so if I asked you to come up and give me a 3-minute mini lecture on empirical formulas, you could talk to me for 3 minutes about the calculating empirical formula from percent composition, from carbon dioxide data, exactly why it's called an empirical formula, how it differs from a molecular formula if you're at analysis. If you're at synthesis now, you can come up with your own ideas about solving different kinds of problems or different kinds of processes. And if you're at evaluation, you can look at 2 different ideas, 2 different processes, and determine whether one is more likely to be correct than the other. And so that's that hierarchy. So if I take you back to high school, and we'll do this by a show of hands, and if I
All right, so I hope the audio came through okay. I apologize, there were not captions on that video, but what Saundra McGuire walked her audience through, she's got a chemistry background and has taught chemistry to students, and going up the pyramid of Bloom's taxonomy with the more lower level thinking of let's do the fundamentals, let's memorize, let's figure out what elemental symbols there are and see if you can recall and recognize those elements. And then it builds on that knowledge from there up to the what's considered higher order thinking of synthesis and evaluation. So taking all of those concepts, applying them, and creating and producing something new with all of that. So the more, to put it poorly, because I try to avoid using the word understand as an ID, but really making sure that the students fully understand and can fully communicate and engage in these chemistry practices. So I think here, we just want to hear from you a little bit, your thoughts, your reactions, your questions regarding Bloom's taxonomy. If these are elements that you've tried in the classroom, things you've thought about before, are there opportunities maybe to use this framework to help communicate to your students the different types of learning they're trying to achieve in your course? Josh, you unmuted first. Anything you want to add?
Yeah, so definitely want to hear from folks. And one thing I would add is oftentimes faculty are familiar with Bloom's taxonomy as a basis for making your curriculum and designing it in a scaffolded way, writing your learning objectives using the verbs aligned with it. But we often don't teach our students explicitly about this. And so Saundra McGuire is suggesting that by teaching our students how breaking down learning into this taxonomy of learning, they might realize some things metacognitively about what they're doing. Maybe they're only studying at a lower level when they need to be practicing a higher level. So just wanted to open up the floor for how you have employed Bloom's taxonomy and how you might imagine it being an effective tool in getting your students to look at their learning habits in new ways.
I'll start and say that I tried to implement this, but haven't been. We thought about, telling them about this, and for the first few weeks, explicitly tell them, okay, the next question is, this area, right? And then it starts asking them, all right, what is this question? What category is this question? And that way we can train them to start thinking about, okay, what kind of question is this, and answer from there. The problem is that I feel like we don't have enough class times to cover the entire material, and now to spend another class time to spend just on Bloom's taxonomy, I have a resistance to that, even though I know that spending one class on this will probably benefit the rest of the semester. It's just it's difficult. So to me, I'm looking for, if possible, some sort of a template for, like, okay, this is a 30-minute class, notes that I can base off of, so that I'm not creating from scratch, because I'm sure many people give this kind of talks. Is that something in mind? If is there like a school-wide thing that we can each modify?
Yeah, what a great question. And we're going to do a couple of really quick thought experiments with our group that Saundra McGuire uses in her presentations that you might be able to apply and implement in your classroom, even starting this week. So see if you like it, and if you want to, a partner to think through more how you could apply it, we'd be happy to do that as well. Other thoughts from folks?
So far, I've never actually used Bloom's taxonomy. Well, I've never actually talked about Bloom's taxonomy to my students. I've mainly used it as a tool to guide my own assessment. So I'll take a look at, okay, I have these assignments. Which of these are currently lower in the taxonomy scale? Which one are higher? And if I don't have a good mix, I'll try to adjust them accordingly. But that's as far as I've tried so far.
For sure. And you're off to a great start. Tom.
Hi, my name is Tom. Sorry, I was a little late. I had a meeting that ran over. So if you haven't met me yet, I work in the Success Studio, and I supervise the tutors. And so something I haven't done yet, but I am planning on doing this semester, is running a training for the tutors on Bloom's taxonomy. And so it's not something I've done yet, but I'm kind of excited to see, it'll be optional, and so, but I'm interested to see how the ones that show up respond, and maybe, you know, it both from their own experience as students, and then, you know, how they might apply it when they're tutoring other students. Because I think a lot of students don't necessarily think about it this way, and I don't know, I haven't like explicitly shared it with, you know, students I've trained or taught, but yeah, and so it's something I'm interested in doing. And I know I think it's interesting at least to like build into the structure of a course. You know, a lot of times, you know, at least in math, I feel like sometimes even sometimes the higher orders of thinking you can at least in a scaffolded way kind of do even before you know some of like the detailed mechanics of the math. And so it can kind of be a good way to lead people in. Like, I really like, there's a project built into the syllabus for college mathematics, which, you know, is like a lower level math course, and like typically you wouldn't expect to get to like that 6th level, but there's a project where it's like take 2 sets of data, do linear regression on it, and kind of see what you get. And it's something, you know, even with not that much math, you know, math background, people can do, and you can get an original insight from at, you know, even that level of math. And I think it's really cool. Like, some of them get really excited doing that project because they're able to tackle a question that's interesting to them, and it is possible no one has looked at that. You know, they're usually fairly like standard, but some of them really tackle some, you know, sometimes they bring a lot of creativity to it. So I think it's interesting to give them an opportunity just kind of structured into the course. Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, thank you so much. That reminds me of a class I took at the Harvard Graduate School of Education called The Having of Wonderful Ideas. And it's kind of that whole idea of, you know, if you give people a problem to work on in an open-ended way, they'll come up with new ways of seeing, doing, and thinking that you might not have considered before. So let's move on to our thought experiment. What we're going to do, and this is a question that you can ask your students, but obviously we're going to ask you to begin to define what you think how we could delineate or distinguish these two concepts. What do you think a student might say as looks like what studying looks like versus what real learning looks like? So take a second, just think about that. If you want to put a thought in the chat, that's great. If you want to unmute and share a thought about this, also fantastic. So just take a second. Maybe we'll hear from a couple folks, see what people write as well. What's the difference between studying and learning if we had to make a distinction between the two?
I love the sound of crickets at 2:34 on a Friday afternoon, so I could just savor this.
This isn't an answer, but I find it really interesting that my brain can't decide whether it wants to look at these as like the actions versus the nouns that are the outcomes of those actions.
Thank you for sharing. A couple messages have popped up in chat as well. Studying, activity done with intent of advancing content mastery. Learning is the actual advancement of that mastery. Studying, a bit more passive, learning able to apply. Studying is memorizing, learning leads to understanding. Inputting versus outputting. Studying is absorbing the knowledge, learning is expressing it, explaining it.
That's great. And Mommy, that's going to connect to our next prompt also. But before we get to the next prompt, let's have a quick look at these images that I think you might have some thoughts on as well. So if the image on the left represents studying and the image on the right represents learning, what's happening in each of these images? You're welcome to unmute and just talk through it if you have any ideas. I see some smiles coming on the screen.
One of the first things that I notice is how isolated the studier is and how collaborative the learners are. There's so many hands in the circle working together. And the other one is just, you know, a poor student alone with their books. And I think that feels representative of those differences. It's like coming together and we're exchanging ideas and bouncing things off of each other. And even with the output, like teaching others, studying, it's just you against the world or that mound of books.
Absolutely. What else? What else do you notice?
The learning picture seems more multidimensional in the sense that, like, the books that are being studied are a bunch of things that are more linear individually. So while she's got a bunch of them out on the table, it's a bunch of linear segments, whereas the learning picture is a lot more emphasis on multiple different connections on different sides of the puzzle pieces.
Fantastic. Any other connections you can make from these images?
I think that the picture on the left is what our students perceive as studying and what they think they need to do to get an A on the test, I feel like, except that the books are replaced again with like YouTube videos or whatever it is that's been in front of them in their eyes.
Exactly. And helping them to realize that distinction can be really, really useful. And I just love if we were to think about Bloom's taxonomy, which we just talked about, probably in that triangle, what's happening on the left in the studying image is more of that lower order thinking, trying to cram that knowledge in, memorize that. Whereas what's happening on the left, these folks trying to figure out, puzzle it together, is kind of what Mommy's talking about of, as learning is this higher order thing that you've got to do on Bloom's, where it's explaining it to others, where it's analyzing, critiquing, figuring out, and it's a more active process. So fantastic. Let's take a look at the next slide. So for the purposes of our workshop, studying and learning, this is how we're defining it. So we just talked about Bloom. So studying is kind of that more lower order thinking versus learning the higher order. Studying is going to get that information into your short-term memory, but it's probably not going to get into that deeper long-term memory that you're going to be able to use in the future. Studying tends to be focused on kind of the what. And as Mommy said, that's what students tend to think, oh, I need to know the what, the content for the test, but they don't realize that actually focusing on the how I could apply this, how it relates to other things, and the why is this important? Why does things work the way they work? Is actually going to promote deeper learning and more success in the long run academically. The studying tends to be kind of more of a cram session, short term, whereas the learning tends to be deeper understanding, constructed little by little. And studying also tends to be difficult to apply the material in new contexts because you have basically only that one context in which you've taken that, and you're not able to apply it in other contexts. Megan, why don't we go to the next slide? And yeah, let's take a look at this video.
The most important thing to convert a student from being a memorizer and regurgitator, the kind of behaviors they've exhibited in high school, to becoming critical thinkers. We found that there are three, we kind of call them super strategies. One is helping students understand the difference between studying and learning. And that's one of the reflection questions I'll ask students so that they can really hone in on the difference between what they have been doing and what they need to do. And most often students will tell me, they haven't thought about it, nobody's asked them the question before, but when I pose it, they'll say, studying is memorizing information for a test or a quiz, but learning is when I understand that information, I can apply it, I can analyze it when I've really made it my own. And so once they understand that difference, and I'll ask them, up to this point, have you been more in study mode or in learn mode? And they say study mode.
So the goal, as our fearless author suggested, is to move the students from study mode to learn mode, to rather than be tempted to cram or binge watch YouTube videos prior to the exam to find more collaborative and more metacognitive ways to try to master the content, which includes wrestling with a problem, breaking down a problem, trying it, failing it, figuring out why it failed, and trying it again. So Josh, I'm going to let you do a little talking here, but essentially the long and short of it is the exercise we just went through is something you can do with your students. So asking your students to meditate on studying versus learning and to try to articulate the differences.
Exactly. And that's really the first strategy, right? Is just making that explicit and having that discussion with them, allowing them to, why don't we go to the next bullet point, leading them to realize that difference for themselves. So if you just stand up there and tell them that, they might be like, I'm not sure. But if you ask them this prompt and have them go through it, they might recognize their own behaviors in that and be like, oh yeah, there is this difference, and here's what I'm doing, and here's how I could be studying more effectively. Because that first image of that young woman in the library, it's not like she wasn't trying hard. She was trying really hard, but just doing the wrong thing. Wasn't leading to success because she was, doing the wrong thing to really have deeper learning. Let's go to the next bullet point. And you can use this to introduce some of those effective study strategies that Ariel and the folks at the Success Studio are experts in. But also, it's our job to help students, empower students to figure out how to be professionals in the fields that we're teaching them about. So not just the content, but we teach students, not content. So we really need to be teaching them how to be professionals, how to go about it, in addition to just the material, and hoping that they're able to pick it up on their own and figure that out.
All right, for this next situation, imagine you were a student and you just got a D on the test. Which option would set you up for better success on the next exam? Drinking an espresso, spending all night rereading the book, or hosting study sessions where you practice teaching the material to your peers? You can use the chat feature. All right, anybody raise your hand or give applause for strategy A? Who would embark upon that adventure? All right, what about strategy B? Who would embark on that adventure? All right, applause, thumbs up. Gorgeous. B in the chat, excellent. Y'all have passed the test. All right, next part of the question, why?
And remember, this is something you're asking your students. So what do you think your students might say, after you've talked about the distinction between studying and learning, and then ask them this question? What do you think they might realize why B might be more effective?
I can definitely picture some initial reluctance to B, where they get a D on a test and then you advise them to teach the material to their peers. And I could see them saying, well, I clearly don't know it well enough because I got a D on the test. And, I really am trying to picture myself as a student getting a D on test. It would I'd be prickly maybe about it. But, I don't know. It's always been helpful. Someone gave me this tip when I was in high school and I was like hesitant, but it got me pretty far.
I'm glad you shared that, Ariel, because it is a lot easier to say it from this side of the desk. There is something very, very humbling about getting a D and then admitting to yourself that you don't know, but then admitting to your peers that you may not know, and then eventually admitting to your professor. So yeah, there is a lot of humility in this process, and maybe that's where you start as an instructor, is coaching instructors through the pain and the shock of that uncomfortable grade.
And another possibility, oh, sorry, Lauren, what were you going to say?
I was going to say, at least with the students that I've been working with over the past recent semesters, I think a lot of them have at least some of the instinct of study groups, at least. So the prickly thing there is less the study groups themselves and more the practice and teaching stuff. But here we're posing it in such two extremes that hopefully they answer the right way, even if they have to get past the prickly part. I always have to wonder, though, when they end up grouping with people who the sort of typical group work question of like, how are you going to group people? Are you letting them group themselves? Are you grouping them so that there's a mixture of ability levels, or I shouldn't say mixture of ability levels, but a mixture of what people have demonstrated so far, maybe, in terms of their learning. Or, if you get 3 people together who all just got D's on the test, are they going to just sort of cycle on themselves? I don't have answers to that one.
Those are really good questions. And, and some the way we phrase the question is kind of meant to draw a very clear binary distinction, but Saundra McGuire, of course, gets a lot more subtle with it. And she'll say, as part of a study strategy, you don't even have to be talking to another person. You could be explaining the thing you just learned to your dog or to your plant. Just the fact of you putting it into your own words in orally or in writing is going to help you more than just rereading it, as Mommy indicated. And and then you could also do in your class, you could have give a voluntary or part of the class, whatever it is, a study session before a big assessment where the students by structure have to come up and facilitate or attempt to teach a certain part of it. And then given that you're in the room, you can correct any misunderstandings or help them, clarify any questions that they still have. But and to Lauren's question of, what if everyone gets D's and they just reinforce each other's mistakes? A way to structure that also is to break up organized groups or break up groups so that there are students at different levels who can teach each other. But the research shows that even students who are, getting D's individually, when they're put together, even with other students with lower understanding, their brain powers combined of figuring out and talking through are going to raise the level of everyone. Maybe not to an A, but at least a little bit. So that's just some more ways why B is more effective. Lauren, I noticed you put in the chat, rubber duck debugging. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that means?
That was just in the context of you saying that they could explain material to their dog or their plant or whatever. I understand that the notion of explaining your code in computer science to a rubber duck or something similarly inanimate is at least somewhat common phrase.
For sure. Just like reading your essay out loud, you'll all of a sudden notice a whole bunch of weird mistakes and awkward phrasings that you didn't notice when you were, just typing it out or reading it off the screen. So it makes a lot of sense. That's just a pretty simple strategy you could offer students as well. Yeah, Megan, let's.
This sort of ties to what we just talked about in terms of the different study strategies, but why one is more effective than the other. Cramming is probably doing what you did prior to the first exam and expecting that strategy to work again is not going to pan out. Looking up the right answers is important to check your work, but some students tend to think just looking up the answers before they've wrestled with the problem, struggling with the problem, is going to magically help them figure it out. The active meaning making that might come from working on the problems with a group or trying to explain the problem to a rubber duck, that represents the struggle to make sense of the material and build new knowledge and to integrate old knowledge on that. And a big part of this as well is keep growth mindset in mind. There's a chance that as a student you could say, you know what, I'm never going to be an A student. I'm just going to hope for a C and cross my fingers. but realizing instead, I'm not an A student, ... yet that keeps that potential in mind and that goal in mind. I want to be mindful of time. We only have 10 minutes left in our session, but we do have, Josh, I'm going to let you talk a little bit more about the study cycle and some study strategies within that. Oh, you were muted.
Sorry about that. So yes, one way to kind of activate learning mode as opposed to study mode is this notion of the study cycle, which Saundra McGuire worked on at LSU. And there's a lot of benefits to it, as you can see on this slide. But let's move to the actual graphic about the study cycle. And this is something you can offer to students as well. And so it starts with them previewing the material before the lecture, before the class, whether it's via reading or a video or just looking at the kind of the bigger concept. So they have some frame of reference going in that allows them to scaffold what you're going to tell them more deeply onto their existing held knowledge. And then obviously they have to really attend class and be fully present and do all the things that you're asking them to do. And then really a benefit to them is reviewing, relatively soon after class, kind of what was covered in class, reviewing their notes, reviewing the reading, making those connections. And then this study cycle that's broken out into the graphic there on the right is having a focused study session. So rather than, cramming the books until you fall asleep, as the woman in our unfortunate image did, to really plan out your specific goal for that study session, to use some of those effective study strategies like concept maps and other visual thinking strategies we could talk about another time, and asking those why, how, and what if questions rather than just the what questions in your study time. Taking breaks, taking active breaks to clear your mind and be able to come back to it refreshed, and then kind of doing a recap or summary. And that's a tool that we could even use in class to do some of those kind of 1-minute papers, exit tickets, those types of things that let students make a bit of meaning out of what they're taking away and reinforce some of what they've learned. And then the last part of the study cycle would just be checking their understanding by asking them to teach their rubber duck or work on a harder problem with their colleague or friend, and assessing metacognitively whether or not their study methods are effective for them. And if not, maybe they could make a change, and maybe that's something they want to talk about with the folks at the Success Studio or with you or whoever it is. So that's just a really quick version of the study cycle to share with you, and also that you can then maybe offer to your students. Let's go to the next slide. Yeah. So we have a bunch of active study strategies, and I know we're running out of time. We want to leave time for y'all to reflect and think about how you might apply this work. But of course, collaboration and really looking at the text critically is helpful, or whatever you're doing. Let's go to the next slide. And we'd already talked about this, how trying to explain something is really helps you realize the gaps in your own understanding and helps you put things into your own words that then can be applied in the future. Repetition obviously is going to be helpful, making connections. So we talk about anchoring new understandings in the brain by scaffolding them onto existing knowledge, and that retrieval practice, and then the higher order thinking like synthesis, comparing, contrasting, and making analogies helps folks to understand things in different ways, build their own new knowledge and understanding of the material. Let's move on. Yeah, go for it, Megan.
So to sum up, clearly there is a lot to this topic, and I want to be respectful of your time. But just to think about some of the things we've talked about, the most important thing is to start demonstrating some of these changes of habits to your students. If you've got students who've never practiced these more advanced study habits before, this may be new territory. There may be an opportunity for you to coach them on this. Bloom's taxonomy can help as a framework for how to contextualize older, rooted in memorization and information absorbing means versus the more sophisticated methods that are going to lead to more fuller understanding and mastery of the topics. Always create opportunities for reflection, because that's a big part of metacognition, asking students what they think they did well, didn't work well, what they might do differently next time, asking them to give a rationale for that method compared to their others, and last but not least, don't underestimate the importance of mindset and adjusting your language to match a growth mindset. You're not working with an A student or a B student or a good student or a bad student. All of your students have the potential to learn and the desire to learn if they are here. Further reading, there's a lot of, Josh and I love books that may become obvious to you as the semester progresses. And these are just a couple of our favorites that we might suggest based on the topics we've talked about today. Most important to emphasize is McGuire's Teach Students How to Learn, which will become our reading project for the upcoming semester. If you are interested in reading with us, we do have a Google form where you can document your interest. We hope to see your responses on that so we can figure out our first time to meet. We are marketing this as a guilt-free book club where even if you haven't done the reading, you will still get something out of the book club.
And in good news, we're not going to have everyone read the whole book. We'll pick a certain chapter to focus on for that one meeting. And so it won't be like a big overwhelming thing. And also we'd love to have, have it not just be us presenting, but have it be maybe a faculty or another success studio or somebody else kind of co-facilitating, bringing their perspective. So it's more of a robust discussion. It feels like a community effort rather than just a program of TLC. So definitely fill out that Google form. We'll drop it in the chat for you in a sec. I know a bunch of you already have. Thank you so much to those of you who have, and hopefully we'll be able to find a time that works for us to get together. Why don't we, I know we're just at 2 minutes, and if folks have to go, totally understandable. You got a lot going on right before classes start, but if folks do want to stick around, we're happy to hear your reflections, answer any questions, or just chat about this topic or anything else you'd like to bring up at this time.
Just like logistics, just before we got on the video, I just wanted to see what formats they had available at the library of the book. And I just got, I was able to really easily download a digital version for like a 3-week loan that I'm sure I could then renew at the end of that 3-week period. So just if people are interested in digital copies, if they had more than one copy available.
For sure.
And thanks
Thank you
for
so
setting
much
this up,
that
Josh and Megan. I so appreciate it. I'm looking forward to it.
Oh yeah, our pleasure, and thank you for bringing that up. Yeah, the idea is not that you have to go buy a book. We would definitely be sending out the link to the electronic version so you could read it on your computer, and also obviously, there are copies in the library as well. And if anyone has any thoughts about strategies from this workshop you could imagine offering, or you want to talk through how you might implement this semester, we'd love to hear from you, whether that's now or later. So again, the floor is still open if anyone wants to jump in. We'll also make this recording available. So if you have a colleague who wanted to be here, missed it, you can certainly, we'll get that recording out and you'll be able to share it with them. So again, thank you so much to everyone for joining us and for your wonderful thoughts and active participation. And we look forward to hearing from you. Feel free to reach out to us individually. Our contact info is up there, or you can always reach out to teach@wit.edu with any questions, or if you just want to share a strategy you've been using with us. And of course, we hope to hear more about how this is impacting you and go deeper into Saundra McGuire's work and how we can implement it here at Wentworth this semester in our Guilt-Free Book Club.